we'll get this going. It is my pleasure to introduce Keegan Sullivan, who's going to give us a bit of the Moneyball play. So, Keegan.
Thank you. All right. My name is Keegan Sullivan. This past summer, I was an intern for Samford University Center for Sports Analytics. I got to work on a variety of different projects with my internship director, Dr. Darren White. He turned me loose on these projects, let me pick something he found interesting to me, guiding me through the entire thing. Today, we're going to cover kind of what I did, what sports analytics is, and where I'm at now. First, we're going to start with what is Moneyball. And I don't know if any of you guys have seen this movie, but it's one of my personal favorites. It involves the Oakland Athletics, and this was in 2002. And at the time, they were a very poor franchise. They didn't have a lot of money to spend. It was hard to compete with the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers of the world, really because they had more money than the Oakland Athletics did. And with baseball, there's no salary cap. And so teams can spend however much money they have. So this movie is about Brad Pitt as Billy Beane, the general manager of the Oakland Athletics. And he brings in Jonah Hill, who plays Peter Brand. And Peter Brand has the sabermetrics approach to baseball. He assigns value to all of the players in the MLB, but not necessarily a monetary value. He's taken a different approach. Instead of looking at batting average, he looks at on base percentage. So he's looking at different statistics that can help a team win games. And so Billy Beane saw Peter Brand's sabermetrics and decided that that was going to be a way that he could compete with the Yankees of the world. So they used Peter Brand's sabermetrics methods to get undervalued players to their team. At first, the owner of the team, the manager of the team didn't like the idea, and they started going against what Billy Beane had built. And so as a result, Billy Beane traded those players away. He traded away the players that the coach wasn't starting, even though he told him to make the manager make those moves. When he did that, midway through the season, they started out a little slow, but midway through the season, they went on a winning streak. And it was actually the largest winning streak in baseball at the time. They won 20 games in a row, which in baseball is an incredibly tough thing to do when you're playing 162 games. To win 20 in a row was unheard of at the time. They went on to win the division. They won the AL West, make the playoffs with a salary cap of $44 million. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot. But the Yankees spent $125 million that same year. They're almost a third of the amount the Yankees were spending. And the Oakland A's were third to last in terms of money spent. Unfortunately for the Athletics, they lost in the first round of the playoffs. Obviously, they didn't win the World Series, but it showed that there could be a new approach to baseball and to sports in general. And it changed people's mind about analytics. Now, unfortunately for me, I don't want to be the Chris Pratts of the world. I don't want to be the Brad Pitts of the world. Instead, I want to be Jonah Hill. So before we get into what I worked on, we're going to talk about where we can see sports analytics on the field today. So the NFL has partnered with Amazon, and they have what they call their next gen stats. And these stats can come before the game, during the game, after the game. But we can look at things like, should a team go for it on 4th and 3? Should a team kick a field goal? Should they punt? Should they try and score a touchdown on this play? When you start looking at individual plays, after a pass has been thrown, we can see what are the odds this pass was completed? Or before the pass is thrown, what are the odds this quarterback completes a pass? We see stuff like this all the time, and Clemson's adopted their own program. Clemson has the Robert H. Brooks Sports Science Institute. And so they help with football. And we also have a program here that helps with our Olympic sports. So our baseballs, our soccers of the world. Sports that don't get as much attention, that don't bring in as much revenue, but we can still be successful in. And as we saw last year when our men's soccer team won the national championship, there was a lot of analytics that went into that. For me, this past summer, I worked with Samford University Center for Sports Analytics. So the 3 projects I worked on. First, I determined rivals based off social media activity. My second project was ranking all 32 NFL fan bases from best to worst, see which teams are really have the best fans, which teams have the worst fans. And finally, I determined the best college programs for NFL success. So we'll get into the first one where we determined rivals based off social media activity. So I did this, you can't see it up there, but I did this using a database called Zoom. And Zoom is an online database regarding social media activity. Provided a representative sample of the population that follows each MLB team on Twitter. I looked at percent of followers of one team that are following each of the other 29 teams in the MLB. So if we look at the Braves, we can see how many Braves followers are following each other MLB team. I also created a baseline audience, which was a sample of the population that follows any of the MLB teams on Twitter or the MLB Twitter account itself. If you follow any of those 30 MLB teams or the MLB Twitter account, your account was put into the baseline audience. And this allowed each team sample to be indexed against a larger sample to see how each team's following compared to a larger population. So here we have some plots. Our x-axis here is the percent of followers of the specified team that follows each other team. So for this plot here, these are all the Phillies followers. We can see that about 21% of Phillies followers are following the Yankees Twitter account. The y-axis here is using that baseline audience that I just defined for you all. And it's the ratio compared to that baseline audience. And so we really want to find a balance of, these plots provide a balance of total followers and proportion to the entire population. A lot of smaller teams don't have as many followers, but compared to the rest of the overall group in the MLB, it can still be considered a lot. These lines are averages for each axis, and we're looking for teams that are far from here, far from the origin. You want teams that are out there to really determine who your rivals are. So we can see a couple things here. We see that the Yankees, the Cubs, the Red Sox, the Dodgers, they're appearing very low on the index, very far on the percent. And this is because those are the four biggest teams in baseball. They have the most followers, they have the most following. People care about these teams. They're the big market teams in the MLB. So as a result, I had to make some changes. I decided to remove those four teams and plot them again. So we're gonna just take them out of the data set and get rid of the large market teams, and that way we'll be able to see some more. Rivals that might appear. The Angels were another team that caused a lot of problems because when I was doing this research, they were very popular on Twitter at the time. Shohei Ohtani was having one of the best years of his career. Mike Trout was one of the best players in baseball. People were very excited about the Angels. They were winning a lot of games. So there was a lot of buzz on Twitter at the time. They always appeared above average in both metrics. So that's just something that needed to be noted because obviously the Angels aren't going to be a rival for every team in the MLB. So then I used both of these plots. So here we have the Astros. I used both of these plots to try and figure out rivals. Obviously, on the right, we can see like the Angels and the Rangers make sense for rivals for the Astros. The Angels are in the same division as the Astros. The Rangers share the same state. Those teams that have those geographic ties are always going to be butting heads. They're always going to be big rivals. But we can't just miss the big teams that we talked about. The Dodgers and the Yankees are so far, they're so much further away from the rest of the sample or from the rest of the group that they have to be considered rivals as well. And it makes sense given the recent history between the clubs. The Astros and the Dodgers played each other for a World Series when the Astros had their scandal. The Astros and the Yankees have played each other multiple times in the American League Championship Series, and they keep beating each other back and forth. And these teams the fans of these teams, they want to keep up with what each other are doing. And as a result, you can call them rivals. So here was the top 5 teams and the bottom 5 teams and how many rivals they had. So the Astros had 4 rivals. The Braves had 3, Marlins 3, Mets 3, Yankees 3. And then down here, these teams didn't identify any rivals based off their social media activity. Over on the right, we can see how many times a team was listed as a rival. So 6 times were the Dodgers listed as a rival for an MLB team. But then down there again, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 teams that were never listed as a rival. So as I was talking about earlier, the rivals that almost always appear were the geographic ones. The Yankees and the Mets share New York. The Angels and the Dodgers share Los Angeles. The Cubs and the White Sox, they share Chicago. Rangers Astros are in the state of Texas. Giants Athletics are in the Bay Area of California. Orioles Nationals are up near DC. Rays Marlins share the state of Florida. They all have that similar geographic space, and each team's fan base identified the other as a rival. Divisional lines usually round up the rest of the identified rivals. And then teams that didn't share geographic location or division usually do not identify another team as a rival at all. The deep history between clubs proved to be less important, as most fans on social media are focused on what their teams are doing today. There are a few key rivalries the research did not pick up. For example, Yankees Red Sox. This includes two teams that were part of that big four that we talked about. Brewers Cubs, same thing. The Cubs were mentioned as one of those big four teams. And then lastly, Braves Phillies. When I conducted this research, the Braves were just fresh off a World Series win. Everyone was talking about the Braves on Twitter. Because of that, it could have just been a reason this rivalry was not picked up. Next, we'll move to ranking all 32 NFL fan bases. This data was collected from SBRnet, which is Sports Business Research Network. And for me to complete this project, I looked at 5 different metrics, and I used all of them to score each of the fan bases from 1 to 33. Obviously, there are 32 NFL teams, but in this data, there was a group of people who did not identify a favorite team. What's important to note about this is a sample of about 5,000 people, and the results are scaled to represent the entire U.S. population aged 13 plus or older. And to be included as part of the population that identifies as a fan, you had to have attended a game or watched a game within the calendar year. The 5 metrics that I looked at: total number of fans.
Was this website or whatever it was, they collected the data?
They did a survey of 5,000 people, and they scaled it up to that US population number. So I looked at the number of total fans, attendance per fan, merchandise purchased, and then merchandise purchased per fan. But using these 5 metrics, the fan bases of each team were ranked for each metric, and then averaged together to find which teams were the best and which teams were the worst. Here's a video I made. It's the NFL fans by team, and we'll be able to see how this went from year to year from 2017 to 2021. From that video, you can see that at the top, the Cowboys were never threatened. They always had the most fans from 2017 to 2021, and there's a reason they call them America's team. But there are a lot of risers and fallers through here. The New England Patriots start out at the top because they still have Tom Brady. Once he leaves and goes to Tampa, the Patriots start to fall, and you can see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers start to rise. You also saw the Chiefs not listed in 2017, but after the emergence of Patrick Mahomes and then winning the Super Bowl, they rose up towards the top. So the average number of American fans aged 13 plus that went to or watched the game over the 5 years was about 127.6 million. That number is what we use to define a fan. Then each year, a percentage was calculated for each team to identify how many of the total fans were a fan of each individual team. Here we have the year and how many fans they had, and then how that scaled up and down from the previous year. You can see that the 5-year percent change was 11%, and the average number of fans was at 127,000 fans, or in thousands, so 127 million fans. So here's a list in alphabetical order of each NFL team and how many fans they had across 5 years, and then the average number is that number divided by 5. Dallas Cowboys were ranked number 1, while the lowest team was the Jacksonville Jaguars here at ranked number 33. So as I talked about with the video, we saw the Buccaneers, the Chiefs, and the Rams were big. They were big risers over the past 5 years. What's interesting to note is all three of these teams have won a Super Bowl in the past 5 years. The largest single season growth belongs to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, even after tripling the size of their fan base in one season, after drafting our guy, Trevor Lawrence, they remained in last for the 2021 season. The Packers, the Seahawks, the Patriots were big fallers. And the largest single season decline belongs to the Miami Dolphins in 2019, almost cutting their fan base in half, then immediately doubling the count a year later, which could have just been a byproduct of the sample itself. And then, as we said, the Cowboys, Patriots, Packers ranked first, second, and third in fans. The Titans, the Chargers, and the Jaguars rounded out the back end of the list. So for each team each year, data was collected to see how many US fans went to one, two, or three, or four or more games. We use this to use the attendance per fan metric. A yearly score was calculated for each team, where 1 point was awarded for one game, 2.5 points for 2 or 3 games, and 4 points for 4 or more games. And then the scores from 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2021 were then added together to find a total score. And that number was divided by the total number of fans across the 5 years to find the attendance per fan metric. We had to exclude 2020 due to the pandemic. Each team had different rules on what was allowed in their stadium, and as a result, we just had to throw it out because it provided an unfair advantage for some teams that were allowed more fans compared to others. So this is the attendance graph, similar to what we just saw with population. We can see that number one, the Green Bay Packers had the most fans in attendance at a game, and last was once again the Jacksonville Jaguars. But when you divide these numbers by how many fans they have, we can see of the fans they have, which fans are going to games. Just because a team doesn't have as many fans as, say, the Dallas Cowboys, the Green Bay Packers, doesn't mean they deserve to be penalized purely because they don't have as big of a fan base. So we saw that the Chargers actually ranked number 1 in attendance per fan, followed by the Cardinals. So yeah, the Chargers ranked first in attendance, where 36% of Chargers fans have attended the games in 2017. They ranked 27th in pure attendance and 32nd in total fans. But based on the number of fans they had, they did pretty well. The Dallas Cowboys and the New England Patriots did not fare nearly as well, finishing 31st and 32nd respectively, only ahead of the group who did not identify a favorite team. This can be said because they have so many fans, and so many of these fans can't make it to games. The Cowboys have fans all over the country. It's hard for a Dallas Cowboys fan in California to go see the Cowboys play a game. Not all teams with large fan bases experience this issue. The Bears, the Packers, the Vikings, all recorded top 10 finishes in both attendance categories, which goes to show that they have a lot of fans and these fans are going to games. So similar to attendance, we collected data, or SBRnet collected data from merchandise, see how many US fans were purchasing merchandise every year. Every year they spent more or less than $50, and by using these responses, different weights were attributed. Spending less than $50 resulted in 1 point, while spending more than $50 resulted in 3 points. Once again, that number was divided by the total number of fans to obtain a ranking for merchandise per fan. These predictions roughly represent how many $25 was spent on merchandise for any team's fans. So the score of 3, that means there was $75 spent. Obviously, that's going to be on the low end. That's easy just to interpret. And here's that same chart for attendance. Once again, Dallas Cowboys near the top, and near the bottom, the Jacksonville Jaguars. It seems to be a trend here. Dallas Cowboys, New England Patriots, Green Bay Packers, the teams that we've been talking about from the beginning, they finished near the top. Teams at the bottom, the Colts, the Titans, and the Chargers. The Las Vegas Raiders ranked first. That's not supposed to say attendance, and merchandise per fan. When that's 96% of their fans spending about $25 on merchandise over the past 5 years. This goes to show that these fans are spending lots of money on their team's gear, and they deserve to be rewarded for that. The 2 other teams that rounded out the top 3 were the Jacksonville Jaguars, despite finishing 28th in total merchandise purchase, and the Dallas Cowboys. The teams that finished last in this category were the Detroit Lions, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Carolina Panthers. From this, we added up the ranks of each team, and then we looking for teams that had the lowest total count. The Green Bay Packers were deemed the best fans in football, while the Titans were deemed the worst fans in football. This big plot here, the blue bars represent how many total fans the team had, while the red chart represented how well they finished across these 5 metrics. So if you have a big red bar and not as big of a blue bar, like we see for the Las Vegas Raiders, because they don't have as many fans, but the fans they have are true fans. And then the reverse can be seen for a team like the New York Giants. They have lots of fans, but they're not great fans relative to the rest of the NFL. So once I finished this, my internship director asked me to create similar visuals that we just saw for the MLB, the MLS, the NBA, the NCAA, the NFL, and the NHL. This data was once again collected from SBRnet, and I don't have to show the entire thing, but here are the results. We can see towards the middle here that Clemson makes an appearance after their national championship win, and then once 2020 hits, they start to fall back down after what we could call a disappointing season. I had top 10 graphs or top 10 racing bar charts, and I had every team that we had data on. Obviously, this is going to be very difficult to see because there are so many teams in college football, but you can see how quickly and how drastically these things are changing. Here's the NFL fans by team, but for the entirety of the 32 teams in the NFL. So you can follow your favorite teams, see how they charted over the 5 years.
Was there kind of a definite dominant leader in NCAA?
Ohio State.
Ohio State was up there near the top. I can go back. So it's interesting that the Big Ten was actually in the lead early here. Teams like Notre Dame and Alabama also near the top. But Ohio State never got caught. It's interesting that teams like Michigan State and LSU, even though they weren't having great seasons, they're having good seasons relative to the rest of the NCAA, but they were never winning that national championship. They were still near the top, in the top 10, and shows that, they have a lot of fans. You saw UCLA and Duke, teams that haven't been relevant in college football, but their fans are still there. These visuals were created using Flourish, which is a great data visualization software. And then to create these racing bar charts, I went and found the logo and the hex code color for each school and the data, using the data provided from my internship director from SBRnet. The third project I worked on was determining the best college programs for NFL success. I was looking at which universities and conferences were producing the best NFL quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. To determine this, I only needed to use two statistics for each position. For quarterbacks, it was games played and passer rating. For those of you who don't know what passer rating is, it's a statistical measure that grades quarterbacks on a scale of 0 to 158.3 using a formula. But it encapsulates other statistics like completion percentage, yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. For running backs, rushing attempts and yards were recorded, while for wide receivers, it was receptions and yards. This data was collected from Pro Football Reference, an online database that contains data from current and historical NFL seasons. The statistics were recorded from 2000 through the 2021 NFL season. The NFL season we're in now has not been included, and the rookie class has not yet been incorporated into these numbers. They were eligible to be in the data set by playing a snap in both college and the NFL during or after the year 2000. And to give each player a score, his two key statistics were multiplied together. These scores determine the best players in this scenario, but the best universities and conferences can also be determined by grouping players together based on these similarities. Only players that attended a university in a Power 5 conference or the University of Notre Dame was included in this data set. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what the Power 5 conferences are, that is the ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the Pac 12, and the SEC. So here we have our quarterbacks. Here to the left is our top 25 quarterbacks, multiplying their games played and their passer rating. I wanted to incorporate games played because I think that having a long career is a lot more important than playing really good for just like 3 games. You want those quarterbacks that they're good, but they've been playing for a long time. So we can see guys like Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, Aaron Rodgers near the top. Now you'll notice that Russell Wilson and Cam Newton are both on here twice, and that's because they changed colleges during their time in college. Russell Wilson started at NC State, moved to Wisconsin, but NC State deserves credit for his success in the NFL because they had an impact on it. Cam Newton was the same way. He started at Florida, but then there's a reason he committed to Florida. Then he ended up transferring to Auburn and bringing them a national championship. So over here on the right, we have the quarterback university analysis. On the x-axis is the number of quarterbacks that each school has, and on the y is their average score.
But not all those quarterbacks on your left are in the,
This is just a list of the top 25 quarterbacks. This list goes
regardless of whether they came from a Power 5 or not,
No, this is just for Power 5 and
not North Dakota State.
yeah, including North Dakota State for quarterbacks that
Okay.
they didn't make any noise for QBU. So we look at NC State and they only had 5 quarterbacks, but these 5 quarterbacks were all very successful in the NFL. We had Phillip Rivers, Russell Wilson, Jacoby Brissett, Mike Glennon, and I don't remember who the 5th was. But then we look at USC a little bit lower down the line. They have 7 quarterbacks, but they're obviously not as successful as those ones at NC State. And then Florida had 10 quarterbacks, the most in the entire data set. But because they had so many, some of them had to end up not being as good as others. So as a result, I deemed North Carolina State as QBU, which is quarterback university, and they are producing the best quarterbacks in college football. Here we're looking at the best conference for producing quarterbacks. We have our 5 Power 5 conferences. How many schools are in them? How many quarterbacks do they produce? The quarterbacks, how many quarterbacks they had per school, total score, average score per player, and average score per school. So here, this one uses average score per player. We can look at how many quarterbacks each conference produced and the average score for those quarterbacks. And then on the right, same thing, but it's number of schools as opposed to number of quarterbacks. This is a good measure of both quantity and quality, so we can see which conference is doing both. And I deemed the ACC as QBC, the quarterback conference. They have guys like Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, all guys that have been very successful in the NFL. Here we have running backs. It's a very similar list to the quarterbacks, just with different names and because it's a different position. We see guys like Frank Gore, Adrian Peterson, LaDainian Tomlinson, all first ballot Hall of Famers in the NFL near the top of this list. For running backs, we have TCU, who is worlds higher than everyone else, but they only have three running backs that have played in the NFL since 2000. And these numbers come from LaDainian Tomlinson, one of the all-time greats. It's hard to give them the distinction of RBU based off of one player's success. We look at other teams like Oklahoma, Miami, or Alabama. Alabama producing the most running backs out of the list. I deemed running back university as the University of Alabama. They have guys like Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, just to name a few. Miami was a close contender, but they're led by Frank Gore, Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, and that's about it. The rest of their 11 running backs don't stack up to the depth that Alabama has. So here we have the same thing that we saw for quarterbacks, but for running backs. And I deemed that the best running back conference is once again the ACC. We can see them over on the right. Their title number of schools and that score is the second highest, only behind the Big 12. And over here, they produce the second most amount of running backs, and they have the second best score. The ACC, they have, as we mentioned, Frank Gore, Clinton Portis, LaShawn McCoy, Dalvin Cook, What's interesting with running backs though, is the SEC is coming. SEC has a huge wave of young running backs in the league that in a couple more years, once they have more yards to their name and more rushing attempts to their name, we could see them take over the ACC. The Big 12 is up here all by themselves, but they only have 55 running backs as opposed to everyone else is around 100. They need that quantity. They have the quality. We can see they have the quality, but they need that quantity in the NFL for them to be considered in the future.
This effect seems to come up. Do you suppose that, Big 12 might be recruited less for that particular position so that the ones that get tend to be of higher quality?
It very well could be, and it also doesn't help them that they only have 10 schools
Yeah.
compared to the other ones having 12 or 14. So it's a smaller conference, but now that with the way conference realignment is going, the Big 12 is bringing in 4 schools and only losing 2. So they're going to be getting up to that 12 number, and we'll be able to see how once conference realignment all shakes out, how they really compare to the rest of the field. So last we have wide receivers. We can see the same thing. Larry Fitzgerald, Reggie Wayne, Steve Smith. These guys are legends in the NFL. And over to the right, we have the plot again. We look at Pittsburgh, who has 6 wide receivers, but is led by one of the greats, Larry Fitzgerald. Miami once again appears near the top. LSU and Ohio State have these young core of guys that are in the league now, and they're also led by guys like Jarvis Landry. I deemed wide receiver U as LSU. We see guys like Jarvis Landry, Dwayne Bowe, Odell Beckham Jr., and then they have a young core of guys who are rookies once this data was collected, and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL today. The last time we look at which conferences are producing the best talent for wide receivers. And once again, the ACC stands out above the rest. Over on the right, they're so much higher than the rest of those schools. And here, the quality of these wide receivers is just so hard to match. They have 4 of the top 5 guys listed here in Larry Fitzgerald, Reggie Wayne, Andre Johnson, and Anquan Bolden. They also have guys like Calvin Johnson from Georgia Tech and DeAndre Hopkins from Clemson. Guys that dominated in the NFL, and DeAndre Hopkins is still dominating today. So once again, the ACC is deemed the best conference for this position. Although an ACC school only claimed the top position one time, they were deemed the best conference for all 3 positions. They got help from a variety of schools, such as Miami, Clemson, North Carolina State, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh, and Boston College. So for each project I worked on, I created an article that was published to Samford's Center for Sports Analytics blog. If you want to read more about any of these projects, please go there and read my posts. Center is always looking for new posts. If you have any project ideas that you want to do, they'd love to hear from you. And for any undergrads or anyone interested in a potential internship, reach out to Dr. White, Dr. Darren White at Samford University. He's always looking for more interns to complete more projects like this. Before I go, I want to talk a little bit about what I've done this semester. This Samford internship led me to being an intern here at Clemson, and I've been working with a variety of different groups. This is a golf project that I worked on this semester, where we were looking at our men's and women's golfers. And so ISA is called your infrasternal angle. And that is an angle right here in your rib cage, and it helps us bucket our athletes into either being wide or narrow. And so we had 10 different metrics we wanted to look at. We wanted to see if there was a difference in our wide athletes versus our narrow athletes. So up here in the top left, we have just our men. We have our narrow and we have our wide. We can see that this one has a p-value of 0.0504. So make of that what you will. It's right there at the 0.05 confidence level. The other one has a p-value of 0.4095, obviously not significant. For our women, we see large p-values and low effect sizes. And then we decided to combine our men and women into one group because of our small data set. We don't have that many golfers. So when we were able to double our number, we can combine them into one group. But we once again see that these p-values are relatively high, and there doesn't seem to be that much of a significance there. The other project I worked on, we were looking at this is for our women's golf team. And so we wanted to look at a bunch of different metrics and how they correlate with our average ball, their average ball speed and their max ball speed. So each point on each plot represents one of our women's golfers. And then here you can select your metric and the graph will auto-populate, the correlation will auto-populate. You can see here with a correlation of 0.7, 0.78, that there seems to be that upward trend. For this, overall, we learned that a lot of these metrics that we looked at didn't have that great of an impact on their ball speed. I'll take any questions about anything I've worked on. Love to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Questions? So can you explain again how it was that you got into this in the first place?
What made me want to get into it?
I didn't know. I know how you.
How I did it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a friend here. He's a year older than me. He's in grad school now. His name is Alexander Harriman. He worked with Samford Center for Sports Analytics 2 summers ago. And he told me about it. I was really interested in it. This is obviously what I want to go into. And this felt like a great opportunity to get some work done in the field. And so I reached out to Dr. White and said, hey, I talked to Alex Harriman. He said he had nothing but great things to say. I'm very interested in, learning more about this opportunity. And he reached out to me. He got back to me, told me he'd love to have me on the team. He helped me out through the entire summer, really let me pick projects that I wanted to work on, stuff that I found interesting. And it made it so much easier to complete the work. Because if you're working on stuff you don't care about, you're not going to want to get the work done. But I sat down every day, wanted to dig more and more into this data and really understand what it was telling me. And so it was just a great opportunity. I'm thankful to Dr. White and Alexander for telling me all about it.
And it was remote, right?
It was a remote internship. He asked for about 10 hours a week, so it was nothing too intensive, but he was there. We had weekly meetings to go over where we were at, and he would provide me with recommendations. So it was a great opportunity, great experience.
Other questions? I'll make a bold prediction. You don't get a lot of comments when you put math videos on YouTube, but since he went and said who's the best conferences, I think he's got the best chance to get internet trolls writing things about your tape. But what about the SEC?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen.
That's something I had to mention. Being a Clemson guy, a lot of people might think there's ACC bias here, but the numbers spoke for themselves. They really did. And you could make an argument for the SEC in some situations, but if you want to make that argument, you can go do the research yourself.
Right. Other questions? Okay, well, let's take speaker. Remember, we have the math in tomorrow. I'd love to see you there. Other than that, you all have a great weekend, and I hope you have a wonderful break, good finals week, and I'll see you guys in January.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, very enjoyable.